let's see where we are with Aristotle and put the final touches to the Aristotelian picture. So in a way, I think it's in essence, it's a very simple picture, though of course getting it all to work out in detail is a little bit complicated. But I want you to imagine, here you are, you're the agent, and you're faced with a world. And in that world you want to act so as to maximize your own happiness, right? So you want to be a happy agent. So you want to do well in action. So you want to make the right choices and so forth. And the output should be the happy you. Right? So you start that way, right? And if you think about that for a second, right, you see there are two kinds of issues. Right? One is what you're going to do, and the other is what you're going to know in order to do what you do. So there are two sides to it, right? One is your agentive side of actually moving your body in some way. But before you do that, you better be sure that you know what the situation you're in is. So just take a very obvious case, right? So the world presents you with a hungry lion. Now imagine you walk through the door closes behind you, and over there's a hungry lion. Well, you better not think that it's a house cat that needs to be just given a little stroke, right? You better not think that. There's a whole lot of things you better not think, right? In fact, what you better think is, it's a hungry lion, and I should try to get out of here, right? And now think of another case, right? So that's a very obvious case. So you go. But notice that if you don't have the right measuring device, you won't measure it correctly. It may just seem obvious that we'd all be able to measure that one correctly. But once it gets a little more complicated, right, our measuring devices, our perceptual apparatus, our motivational set, our desires, appetites, emotions, right, they may not be well adjusted. You may be foolhardy and you think, you know, I've never done any lion taming, but this might be a good time to start, right? Don't you get a chair or something and you kind of hold it up like this and then the lion does what you want? So that would be foolhardy, right? The coward is just frozen in place, right? Oh my God, a lion, right? And the courageous person is resourceful, right? Thinks, yeah, this is a dangerous situation. I've really got to try to get out of it, but I'm not so paralyzed by my fear that really I can't think anything. So that's a very obvious kind of case. To keep the obvious ones in mind, the unobvious ones are just the obvious ones with bells and whistles. But get the obvious ones first. So now let's take a non-obvious one. Right, you're walking along the street and someone asks you for a handout. And if you're one of us, kind of a normal kind of person, right, you're probably going to think maybe you should give them something. Unless you're really hard-hearted, you might be, especially if they look like, you know, they're, as we say, good people, not just hustlers, but maybe somebody in trouble, right? Someone asks you for bus fare home or tells you they're hungry. We're usually not indifferent to that. But what should you do? Should you give them something? How much should you give them? Should you buy them a meal or give them the money? Should you, most of the time, we do something, but it's not always obvious that what we do is a very good thing. So sometimes, in cases like that, we act to make ourselves feel good, but we don't actually achieve the good. Right? So take a kind of case where it would be that actually what you'd be much better off doing is taking your $5 and contributing to political change so that fewer people are on the streets. That's harder because your emotions tell you, give the money. And we'll see that Kant was going to use cases like this to try to drive you towards his position. So sometimes our feelings, which are very good at dealing with quick dirty situations, getting us moving, etc. But when we look at them over long term, we see that always to act on them may not be a very good idea. Sometimes we should take a pull back and think, is this a good idea overall? And that's a big issue in, for example, giving to charities, right? Because we know that our proclivities, the kinds of natural reactions we have, can be exploited to cheat us. Right? So a lot of charities are actually not really good things to give money to. Why? Well, they don't actually turn around very much of that money and give it to the needy. Far too much of it gets skimmed off by the administration. And there's an app you can get that will tell you how much of your actual money goes to the needy. Then you have to worry about when it goes to say, to a distant country. Does it line the pockets of dictators, or does it actually go to them? So sometimes we need to know an awful lot if we're going to bring about the good that we want to bring about. Right? It's not enough that we have the right emotional reactions. But here's the challenge, right? When you look at the world comes at you fast. It's there. It's not like you first do a lot of consideration and then you step into the world. You're already in there, and it's already making demands on you. In fact, right, as soon as you become cognizant, as soon as you're able to figure out things about the world, you realize you already have huge commitments, right? You love your sister, you love your parents, you're a citizen, you're in school, you're a whole big load of things already. Right? Before you don't negotiate those things. You don't sit down, right, as you're about to exit your mother's womb, so to speak. You think, okay, so which of these things am I going to be involved in, right? Let me take the boxes off. No, you have to be shaped and formed as an agent. But already, by the time you are one, you realize that you're an agent of a certain kind. For example, you're male or female, or transgender, or wishes you weren't, whatever you were. There are a whole lot of things you might turn out you are, but you get a whole big little pile of stuff just handed to you. You're a certain size, you're a certain color, you're a certain IQ, all this just is given to you, and then you have to try to do something with it. So what you'd like is, so now we're going to look into the soul of this agent, and what we're going to see in there is, in part, right, a whole lot of our little handy measuring devices, our little laboratory balances, right? And these are correlated with the various emotions. Right, and then we look further, we're going to see some cognitive stuff. And right in there, we're going to look and see, well, what would you need to have by way of not just the fast, dirty emotional responses, which you want to get right, but also the slower, longer-term ones that you want to get right too, where you're thinking about what the world is like, you're coming to an understanding of it. So let me just go back to the little story I told you. So you're disposed to help the needy. Maybe you're very disposed to help them. You want to take a good chunk of your salary and give it to a good cause. You just can't bear it that there are the suffering, hungry in the world. You want to do something about it. Oh, that's an emotional response, and let's suppose a pretty good one. But you're not very good at doing the next bit, namely working out how to effectively give what you want to give. So you tend to just pick the first charity on the list, write them a check, and then think, now I can get on with my own life because I don't feel guilty anymore. I've given a big check. To find out what you should do in order to actually have done some good with your money as opposed to making yourself just feel good, you may have to do quite a lot of research and thinking. That's not about your emotions. And that will be involved in here. So Aristotle carves up this bit into two bits. Practical wisdom, as he calls it, phronesis. And theoretical wisdom. And he says those are the two, those are two intellectual virtues or virtues of thought. And if you have those, then you're very good at first figuring out theoretically what the world is like. So you're not wrong about it. That's the sort of good thing. You're not You're not thinking, oh, you know, really, every 10 years there's just a massive cycle in the world and all the poor people become rich and all the rich people become poor, so I shouldn't really worry about it. Right, that's wrong, in case you were thinking that it's true. And, you know, right, that's a bit of theoretical knowledge, right? And then there's what shall I do? And that involves not just your emotional responses to the world, but you're working out what on the basis of them you should do. And so the practical wisdom comes in, and part of it's got an executive branch. So given that what I want to do is do a lot of good for people, what is the most effective means to doing it? And notice that just having the right goals isn't enough. You need to take the right means to them. So if I take my $100 million gift to charity and I give it to a corrupt charity, I haven't done any good with it. Right? Maybe it goes off to line the pockets of dictators, makes things worse for the poor. Right? So I haven't succeeded. Even though my aim is right, I haven't chosen good means. On the other hand, right, I could be really good at calculating means, but have really bad ends. Right? So what I really want to do is to make life as miserable as possible for as many of those people as possible, right? And I'm very good at calculating the means to it, right? But my ends are very bad. So we've got to have, right, two things. We've got to have correct ends and correct means if we want to be practically wise. Now, there's a nice little tweak in Aristotle. What makes your ends correct? So the instrumental part of reason is very easy in one way. It's very easy to say what it is. It might be hard to do it, but we're not in difficulty about seeing, right, how to make some sense of it. It's about, well, taking effective procedures to get the goal you have in mind. So if you're thinking, well, I'd really like to make an omelet. No, actually, it's much better. I really want to make a souffle. I've actually seen this happen. So, I do everything right. I get the souffle dish all aligned, then I get the eggs on the egg whites whipped and beaten, and then I put it in the souffle dish, and then I put a lid on the souffle dish. Well, a souffle is supposed to rise. If you put a lid on it, it won't. Right? So don't put a lid on your souffle dish. It's a major piece of that, right? So, but what makes, right, so that's easy. It's easy enough to figure out, right, how to do the ends. It might not be easy to figure out in this case what the best means are, but the notion of what means are and what makes them good, they're just effective, efficient, they bring about their cost, their low cost, etc. That's pretty clear. What makes your ends correct, though? How do you make sure that you're going for the correct ends? And Aristotle has a subtle little story about this, which we won't be able to do full justice to. We'll just be able to kind of give ourselves the flavor of it, and then we'll sort of see how he does it. So what he says is, okay, so what we look in, so this is the cognitive part, and this is the part that's your motivational stuff. And then he's got a little, as we'll see Kant does too, there's a little gray area in which there's a kind of overlap between your motivational side and your cognitive apparatus. This is the part where Aristotle says you put rational wish. So in the little gray area, there's something in your motivational set, right, that's there because you've got all this cognitive material. So an animal that doesn't have this cognitive stuff doesn't have rational wish. What is it? It's our old friend, right, the logisticon, come back. That's Plato's thought. Remember that the rational part for Plato is not just a part that works out means. It's a part that is sensitive to ends, right? It has an end. Not just means to an end, but your rational part has an end. So if we look in here, what we'll find is just a desire, which is a desire. Aristotle says it's a calculative desire, and then he tells us in the Eudemian Ethics what he means by that. It's this. It's a desire based on calculation. So when when you calculate the best means to your end, the desire now is for you to do that. So, right, so it's a desire based and if you look up wish in the index to your copy of the 1918 Ethics, you'll find all the passages about it explaining, giving an outline of it, but this is what it is. It's a desire based on calculation, right, for what calculation determines. So let's look at again a case. So you calculate that the best thing to do with your $100 million is to give up the Red Cross. And so you work all that out, you get all the spreadsheets out, you look at all the different charities, you see that the Red Cross is the most efficient, you see that they give it to the right kinds of people. You go through all that crap. And then you think, okay, I'm going to give it to the Red Cross. But then you don't. Why? Well, here's what happens, right? So you're on your way to the Red Cross office with your hot little check in hand, right? And it's in the charities building, you know, so there are a lot of them. And as you get in the elevator, right, there's this really cute girl in the elevator, right? And she says, "Oh, are you coming to make a donation?" And you say, "Oh yeah, I was thinking, you know, I did a whole big load of work and gave it to the Red Cross." She said, "Oh no, you should really give it to the Me charity. It's much better than the Red Cross. So why don't you come over to my office?" And then what happens is your desire to please this attractive, well, maybe you have even more nefarious desires than that, but it doesn't matter, right? You end up giving the $1 million check, or $100 million check, to a different, we do this all the time, right? We do a big load of calculation. We think, you know the car you should buy? You should really buy a VW Bug, right? So you do all this calculating, probably not the right one, but you do this big load of calculation, you think that's the rational choice. But then, right, you go to the car dealership and they say, "Oh, you want a Bug? Yeah, they're really good, but have you looked at this this really cool sports car over here? You know, it's really good. It's only a little bit more money a month, but it's a really," and you do it, right? It's the version of weakness of will, right? Where even though you've done all your calculation right, you may not still act on it. So wish is what ensures that you act on it. But notice we still haven't figured out what makes the end correct. We've only figured this out, that you've got in your apparatus something that is sensitive to your calculation. If it's strong enough, you do it. And so remember our little chart? So if we go over here, right, when we look at our little chart, we've got appetite, spirited desires. You find Aristotle talking about both of these, right? And then we've got rational desires. And we ask, okay, so what happens when these conflict? Right, so what happens when your rational desires conflict with your appetites? So if we've got a conflict, we'll just do them this way. We've got a conflict with these two, so we've got conflict. And there are two possibilities, right? One is, well, your appetite, as in the case I imagined with the pretty girl in the elevator on the $100 million check, right, your appetites overcome your wish. Your wish, which tracks the result of your calculation, gets overwhelmed by your appetite. And in that case, so if appetite wins, you're weak-willed, or you lack self-control is the terminology that I like. And if rational desire wins, you're self-controlled. But what do you have to be virtuous? Well, you have to have no conflict. and that makes you virtuous. And so, again, think of a very simple case, and then hold on to the very simple case, and don't let anything distract you, even when the cases get complicated. Out this way. Right? Consider the difference between someone who goes to the restaurant, wants the Big Mac, but knows they should have the spinach salad, and chooses the spinach salad. They're self-controlled because their appetite is frustrated by their rational choice. They make the right choice, but it's not cost-free. Their appetite says, "I want that," right? And their spiritual desire says, "No!" Right? That's not good. Internal conflict is intrinsically unstable. No, just move things around a little bit, and you'll do the wrong thing. Right? So you don't want that. Now think of the case where you're weak-willed. Oh, you know you should have the spinach salad, but you go for the Big Mac. Right? Yeah.
So is it the case that if there's internal conflict, you can't be virtuous?
You can't be virtuous, yeah. Because virtuous requires no conflict. This is what we hear in book, chapter 13 of book 1. It says, but in the virtuous person, right, there's this harmony. Right? So now did you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, I just was wondering if, is habit forming supposed to be the solution to being weak-willed?
It's not supposed to be the whole solution, but it's supposed to be part of the solution. So if you have the right habits, then you won't you won't be weak-willed, and you won't be, if you have the right habits, you won't need to be self-controlled either. Why? Well, let's go over to the no conflict. Suppose your appetites, Jonah, we have to think of it this way, right? Reason doesn't enter our lives in the following way, namely, it enters our lives from us. Reason enters our lives long before we have any capacity to exercise any reason at all. It enters in, let's say, through our parents and surrounding society. So suppose we have good parents, ones who want us to have good eating habits, bring us up with good eating habits, get us to enjoy and love the things that are really good for us, that promote our health. Right? Then when we face the restaurant, there's no conflict. Right? We want the spinach salad. We like it. We don't hunger for the hamburgers. That's hold on to that picture. Now, let's look at the no conflict situation. Bring it over here. And the claim is that everything in your motivational set is in the no conflict situation, your end is right. You're aiming at the right end. Well, why? Well, just think about it for a second. Right? What is happiness going to be? Well, it's some satisfaction of the things that are in your motivational set. So if you're able to satisfy, right, all the things that are in your motivational set, well, then that's what happiness is, roughly speaking, going to be. Right? The only thing that could detract from it is, well, inner conflict. That's the case of self-control. You do the right things, but you don't enjoy them. Weak-will, you don't do the right things. Harmony, you choose the right things. You go for the right ends. So now we ask, okay, so what? Okay, I get it. That's got to be what it is. It's got to be something like that. But now, what makes all that right? Now, you see, you can keep kind of going and ask yourself, okay, so my motivational set, so now let's look at this, let's look at the motivational set and say that it's harmonious. Fine, we want it to be harmonious. But what song do we want it to sing? We want it to be a harmonious, they want them all to sing the same song. But what song should it be that they sing? That's another question. And the way that Aristotle answers it is this. He says, well, let's go back to the function argument. And let's look at and ask ourselves, which ends are complete, self-sufficient, and so on. So when we look at our motivational set, we don't just want it to be harmonious, we want it to be properly ordered. And what does properly ordered means? It means this. Well, look at the case where all your motives will be in harmony, but they'll all be in harmony around an appetitive end. You'll be a moneymaker. So you're a harmonious moneymaker, right? What about a harmonious spirited person who wants honor? Yeah, you're a harmonious honored. And what about a harmonious person who pursues understanding and knowledge? Well, what's the difference between any one of those? That they all just virtuous, but in different ways, pursuing different ends? Then virtue just becomes a means to an end, right? It's just, well, it's not constant across all three. It varies with your ends. You with me? Okay, so now the challenge is, right, which one of the three harmonies is the right one? Which tune should be singing? Reason's tune, spirit's tune, or appetite's tune? And guess what the answer is? You should be singing reason's tune. Why? Because, right, reason's goal is not just this. It's not just that reason's in the position to produce the best harmony. It can do that even if it's the slave of appetite, right? Arguably, right? Reason just works for appetite and does it well. Reason works for spirit and does it well. Why should it be working for itself that does it best? Well, the answer is that one of reason's activities is the most pleasant one. It's not only the most pleasant one, it's the most self-sufficient, and it's the most complete. Right? It has all those features that back in book 1, chapter 7, we said happiness had to have. So when we get it properly ordered, right, properly ordered one will be so as to maximize contemplation. And that's what we got in book 6. That's the end. That's the final solution, so to speak. So here's the thought again. Just think of it very simply. So start with the thought that you can all appreciate. You want a harmonious motivational set. You don't want one part to be pulling against the other, then you won't achieve your goals that way. And in order to get a harmonious one, right, you want to not just have the right ends, but you want to take the correct means to them. So you want to be instrumentally rational. You want to take the right means to the right goals. You want a harmonious set. But you could have the following view. You could think different ends for different people. So some people are appetitive, but as long as they're really successfully appetitive, harmoniously appetitive, take rational means to their ends, why not be appetitive? What about spirit? Same deal. Why should we pick out the one where you're harmonious and properly ordered so as to maximize contemplation, right? So as to maximize honor, that would be spirited satisfaction. We've got three competitors. As Aristotle says already, right at the beginning of the Ethics, there are three different lives that people pursue. Right? Which one should we pursue? And then he gives us some reason to think that, well, the appetitive satisfaction can't be our end. Why? Well, we're too complicated for that. That's in a way his answer. That can't be right because cattle are like that, right? That's just to give you the flavor that you'd be missing out on something if you made all the if you pursued only appetitive satisfaction. You'd be missing out on, well, for example, the intrinsic value of being honored, of being loved, of other things that are not appetites. You'd miss out on those. If they're more valuable, you're missing out on something that's more valuable. So suppose you think, oh, yeah, I get it. I want to be honored. And Aristotle says, yeah, but not just by anybody, though, right? I mean, there are idiots out there, and who cares whether they honor you or not, right? Oh, so you want to be honored by people who are good at honoring, right? Who value the right things about you. And then you think, well, so what would make that true? Why would they have to be doing in order to make sure that they were honoring me for real things that are really honorable? So he just raises some questions about each one of these two that push us in the direction of thinking that what we really want to be able to do is to understand the structure of the world. And first we want to do that as a kind of instrumental means to being effective in anything, right? Because we better get our theory of the world right, otherwise we're going to be ineffective agents. You know, so if we really think that carbon emissions have no effect on global temperatures, we're going to be grossly ineffective agents of producing our own future happiness, because we're going to make a planet that we can't live on. And that's true of nearly everything. Oh, you know, just throw it in the river. It's fine if there are about 3 people or 103 people living by the river, but when there are 100 million of them living by the river, you're not going to have a very nice river after a while, right? So that's a question that's going to come back to us with Kant. Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure I understood this correctly. Yeah. Are correct ends and means part of theoretical wisdom or practical wisdom?
Well, so they are first determined, as Aristotle says, it's your virtues of character that make the end right. So remember we went through the little story, right? It's the harmony that makes the end right. But it's not just harmony. It's harmony properly ordered. It's not just harmoniously singing a song, it's harmoniously singing the right song. What makes the song right is this. It turns out that reason's end, contemplation, is the most complete, the most self-sufficient, and the most pleasant end. Just like in Plato. The argument at the end is, this is the best thing to do. All the others have defects as ends. So honor needs other people. That's always risky, right? Appetite while you're no sooner full than you're empty again. That's not so great. But contemplation, right, is reliably something you can do by yourself if you're really good at it, so you don't need other people. And that's intrinsically satisfying and rewarding and so on. So you get, that's the story that justifies it. So we could accept the story up to here. You need order, you need harmony, well, we get all of that. If you want happiness, you need all of those things. But we might not want to select one. We might doubt that that can be right. Right? So that would be the question, would be, could we go all the way with Aristotle? Well, to fully understand why he wants us to go there, we'd have to read the last book of the Ethics, but we'd also want to look at his metaphysics. Why? Well, because Aristotle thinks of ourselves this way, and this is a really nice picture. So we'll take a little cutout of the rest of the story and we'll look in here. It says, well, we can look at ourselves from 2 perspectives. You'll see that Kant adopts the very same strategy. That's a very significant strategy. It says, well, we can look at ourselves from the inside. And we can look at ourselves from the outside. And this is the practical or agentive perspective. And this is the theoretical perspective. This doesn't go out of style. If you read Thomas Nagel's The View from Nowhere, you're getting a picture like this. Theory looks at us this way, right? Imagine it's easiest to do it this way. Just think of extraterrestrials who arrive on our planet. They're among us already, probably. And they're trying to figure us out. They're trying to, you know some people who are definitely extraterrestrial, right? They're trying to figure out what we're like. They're not one of us. So they have to make sense of us the way we make sense of cats and dogs and lions and gerbils. Right? We're not one of them. We don't have an internal perspective. We don't know what it's like to be one of those things. We have to try to figure it out by doing theory. Right? So we come up with the view about what human beings are like. Right? Let the extraterrestrials do it so that we're not involved. So the extraterrestrials take a view of us and they write a book, and the book is called What Human Beings Are Really Like and What Would Really Make Them Happy. And they publish it, and we read it. And we've got every reason to believe that they give us all the data, right? And we look at it all and we think, yeah, man, wow, that's right. Right? And what they tell us is, when we look at the structure of ourselves, look at what kinds of souls we've got, look at what kinds of things we do, we're actually, by nature, theoreticians. We really should build our whole lives around our theoretical activities and our contemplative ones, and we should contemplate the best things to contemplate. And what are those? Well, in Aristotle's view, it's a kind of God. But what is that God? Well, Aristotle thinks it's thought thinking itself. It's self-consciousness. So let me put you in the mood for it. I can get you there, but you have to bear with me for a second. I can give you a glimpse of what it's like to be God. On Aristotle's view. Which I think is a very good one, by the way, and I'll tell you a little story about it to kind of give it some oomph. So think this way. First, think of something. Think of this. Think of redness. Just imagine you're inside a red sphere, right? And when you look, you see seamless redness, right? There's no boundary, no border. You just see redness. With me? Now, take away the redness. It's just like this. It's that the light is on, but you're not seeing anything, right? Except it's the intellectual equivalent of light. It's the intelligibility, right, that's there. That's your self-consciousness, right? It's that you're able to have that state that I just described that puts you in the self-conscious, or among the self-conscious creatures. Yes? Now we take another step. So think about all the great mystics who describe what the ecstatic state that they get by being mystics is. And what they say is this: when you're in the mystical state, there's no difference between you and the thing that you're thinking about or contemplating. That difference disappears. There's a sense of fulfillment and joy, but there's no content. There's no object. It's not like red or a lion in the corner or anything like that, or a number. It's just the light is on, and it's glorious. And all you want to do is be in that illuminated state where all your cares of, there's nothing but that, right? That's the story. So that's the place you want to get to. And you want to construct your life so that you spend a lot of time in that condition. Why? Because it's beatific. That's true happiness. Now, let me just add the little bit of realism. You might think, oh yeah, but man, who can believe that crap, right? Okay. Well, first you've got the evidence of the mystics. It's not just, these are people who spend a lot of time training to do this. They all report this from many different traditions. So we've got a little bit of empirical evidence. That was another fact. We have no good theory of self-consciousness that allows us to see it as something that simply emerges from something else. It looks like self-consciousness is a kind of raw ingredient of the universe. This is what Aristotle thought. He thought, absolutely, there's a little bit in us that you can't get by other things. So David Chalmers is the local champion of this nowadays. Well, we don't have to believe it. What we have to do is see that it's not absurd to think something like this, that we're not just doing some kind of medieval nonsense. We think there's some basis for it. Okay, and that's enough. That's enough to tell us that that's the Aristotelian story. We don't have to buy the story. All we're doing now is trying to understand it. And we can see why, Aristotle might think something like this. Well, why? Because he thinks that when we adopt the extraterrestrial point of view on ourselves, which he does in the metaphysics, that's what's revealed to be the nature of the universe. The best thing in the universe is self-consciousness. Without it, you can't have any scientific knowledge, you can't have any pleasures, you can't have anything. It's the ultimate first principle that you refer to in Heidegger. So that's what we see from the outside. And he says, and if you're able to get there, if you're able to do what the mystics do, and put yourself in that state, you'll agree from the inside that the outside is true. And look, you better. Why? Well, suppose you don't, and this is what Kant was going to say. The inside and the outside don't agree. But that leaves him with a real schism in the world that it's very hard to explain. There's this non-negotiable boundary between the theoretical and the practical. Yeah.
I just have a question. Like, if according to Aristotle, God is sort of like just like raw subjectivity, does that mean that God is not an object that we can then go inquire about? Basically, I'm just thinking if like God is like pure subjectivity and is not any sort of like agent or person or object, does that mean that we can't go about investigating subjectivity?
You just told the whole story right there. That's the result of the investigation. His thought, noesis, noesios, noesio, noesis. Understanding, understanding, understanding. That's what he is. But to see how that can be so, that takes a lot of work. I've just jumped over all the hard part and told you the end. But that's the story. There's no more to say than that. God is a kind of science personified, namely that very one that's the science of God. He is that contemplating. He is actively engaged in that contemplating. So before that gets hairy, and I'm not expecting that we're all just going to roll over for those. I think that what we should think, though, is we should just actually see that it's not absurd. And that when we make choices like that we prefer appetite or we prefer being approved of or whatever else it is, it may be because we're ignorant of a better good, that is within our capacity to reach, but we've never tasted it, and so we don't see how sweet it is. But we've got evidence that if we did taste it, it would be very sweet. Now you can see why when St. Thomas read the Nicomachean Ethics and the Metaphysics, Catholic theologian, he thought, oh, that's what the beatific vision is. And when we go to heaven, what happens is we're in that contemplative state. We're at one with God, who's that very contemplator. Now, there's a downside for St. Thomas, which is precisely the one. Aristotle's God doesn't know anything about us at all. He thinks only about himself. Well, as Aristotle says, why would he think of anything other than the best thing, namely himself? And he doesn't do anything because, well, why should he? He is already in the perfect beatific state. Why would he do anything else? He's already at the end, so what would he do? He can't improve it. Though he doesn't go around making the world. Aristotle thinks the world is eternal, backwards. There never was a starting point, which seems to me to be a reasonable position to hold about it. And a whole lot of other things follow. But we don't need to go there. What I want to take you to is just this, go back through the little bit of story, and then we have to say, okay, well, I see what the story is. And then whether it's going to be a true story or not, well, we're going to have to see when we reach Kant and Nietzsche and look back at it. But before we can decide that, we need to be sure that we understand it. Yeah.
So, the distinction between theoretical and practical perspective makes me wonder one question. Is Aristotle's ultimate project a moral metaphysical one or moral psychological one? Because I see that if it's a project in moral metaphysics, then it's a good and plausible picture. But if it's a moral psychological project, and I don't see how necessarily it succeeds, because think of a depressed person who might have experienced these kind of supposed goods, but still don't find, like, cannot think of a reason to be virtuous in this sense.
And so Aristotle has a story about this, and I think that's a really good one. He said, well, look, food, really nice food tastes very good to you when you're healthy. But if you get sick, things that used to taste really good to you taste awful. Now, when you're measuring devices are tilted one way or another, you don't accurately measure the goods that are there. So what we have to say about such an agent is they're not good people to make judgments, use as making judgments about what's really good or not. It's like this, you go to someone who's red-green colorblind or somebody who can't discriminate flavors, and you say, so what colors are these things? Oh, really bad to use someone who's red-green colorblind, right? And what about somebody who can't tell the difference between salt and sugar? Really bad person. And the same is true for an agent who says, what really makes you happy? Well, first I'll tell you what, you need to get a lot of little pins. You already don't like the rest of the story, right? You know that can't be the path to happiness. And you want me to tell you what you do with the little pins? No. I think already I don't want to hear what you have to say, right? So let's go back, though, just very quickly and make sure we're kind of on the page. I want you to get those simple facts, not the complex elaborations. We don't need those for our purposes. We need only the structure. And I want to pull out a few elements of the structure that I think are extremely good, so we can keep a lot, even if we don't buy off, right? And that's generally true in philosophy. You seldom want to buy the whole picture. You want that, but not this. And then the good thought is, can you have that without this? And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So first I want to go back to the agent dealing with the world. And I want to focus on one aspect of it, right? The construction of the scene. This is often left out by ethicists, but it's the most important. So we're going to ask ourselves about this agent, right? We're going to pull it out and say, construction. I'm going to tell you a little construction of the scene story. It's a deviant one. This is not a good one. This is not how you should do it, but it'll give you the flavor for how you should do it. So suppose you're an insectophobe. You're afraid of insects. Pathologically afraid of insects, right? What is the nature of that fear? Well, the first is, it's not just this, that when you see an insect, you respond by jumping away or shaking in your boots or whatever. It's that you tend to see things as insects, right? So when you look out at a scene and you see a little black thing on the ceiling or whatever, you think it's a spider. It's not just about your responding to actual insects. It's that you tend to see insects everywhere, right? Because you're alert to the possibility of things being insects. I can tell you, I have mild insectophobia, right? And there are two things. One is there's a little crack in the ceiling in my bedroom, and there's a little knot in the floor. I regularly see those as insects. Then I have to say, oh, you've already checked them out, right? Now, we're all a bit like this, right? That is, right, now what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is Notice that I'm constructing the scene around saliences, points of salience, things to pay attention to that aren't worth paying attention to. Namely, it's not worth paying attention to the crack in the ceiling or the knot in the floor, right? Don't construct the scene so that those pop out at you as something you need to deal with. You don't need to deal with those. Forget about them, right? Every time you create a salience, you use psychological energy, attention, your emotions are engaged. You don't want to waste your time and your energy constructing points of salience that are not salient to any of your practical purposes. They won't impact your happiness at all. Why pay attention to them? So in the construction of the scene, there are these nice things called points of salience. Where to look? So just think about it. You go into a room, this room, right? I've got all these people in it. Where do you look? That you don't even think about it. The saliences are already given to you by your interests, your goals, your proclivities, your sensitivities. So let me I know this has all happened to you because it happens to everyone. So imagine this, right? You're in the room, you're paying attention to the lecture, and then you get a kind of creepy feeling. The creepy feeling you get is that someone is paying some kind of attention to you that's kind of uncomfortable making. I mean, maybe it's somebody coming on to you or whatever, or maybe it's somebody threatening, you don't know. But you get this feeling that the saliences are changing and you start looking somewhere else, right? Something is puzzling. Maybe it's that you hear a little noise and you wonder what it is. You look there, right? Maybe it's that somebody's tapping your chair or pushing it. Maybe it's, right, something else. You don't, right? Notice the way our attention shifts. It doesn't shift unscriptedly. We can figure out why our attention is attracted. And there are people who spend a lot of time figuring out how to attract our attention, right? They want us to focus on something other than what we're focused on now. So think of pop-ups on your computer screen. They pop up, and they say, pay attention to me, look, I'm flickering, look at me, buy me, right? And the world is like that. Everybody wants a little bit of our attention for something. Objects do, and the question is, where is it going to go? And we don't just decide that. It's often decided already. That is, our attention just does go somewhere.
But the fact that it's decided already doesn't really say that they are actually not worth paying attention to.
No, I agree. That's right. I gave you an example of a deviant one, where, to highlight it, where that your attention goes there is a waste of your attention. You're attending to the wrong things, right? It may be that there's something much more important for you to attend to. You're busy looking at the crack of the ceiling and not on the floor. And that's just true generally. Let me give a different example. So you go into a room, and you're somebody who's inclined to think that other people are actually a little hostile. They're not to be trusted fully. The general attitude of people is they're going to try to take advantage of you. And so already you've created saliences. You're looking out for certain kinds of things. You're not looking out for others. For example, you don't notice friendly things because you either block them out or you interpret them as covert hostility. Right? You're anxious about. You're using up a lot of psychological energy just being in the space, right? So now think about what it would be like if you got your points of salience right. Right? You paid attention to and what I mean by that is things that actually do have a real impact on your happiness, right? And you pay the right amount of attention to the things that have more impact and less attention to things that have less. You're the eudaimonic agent. Right. And what are you doing? You're constructing the scene correctly. You're apportioning your attention and what will galvanize your actions by the points of salience. The fact that you don't do it typically consciously is just what makes this story attractive. It says you want to get your measuring devices right because they're going to kick in, right, quite independently. You don't want to have to keep censoring them. That undoes the whole point of them, right? If it's like this, like with me, I see those spot on the ceiling, they're not on the floor, and then I have to say to myself, no, those are not insects. That takes time. If they were insects, I could already be being eaten by the damn tarantula by the time right? So you don't, the whole point of the fast, dirty things is to be fast and dirty. If you start stepping in every time, you're going to undo the good of them. You need to be creating points of salience before you do any deliberating. Why? Well, because you won't know what to deliberate about unless your points of salience are correct. So the construction of the scene, now let's take the moral salience. What's morally salient in this room right now? Well, suppose I were to ask you that. You know, we're all moral agents, and we have to be particularly aware of points of moral salience, things we should be devoting our moral attention to. Well, right now, if I said, what are the points of moral salience, most of us would probably think, what? Right? Now, if we were utilitarians, there would be millions of points of moral salience. This is a big problem with utilitarianism, right? It says, you should always be trying to maximize the utility of the greatest good. Well, that's something you can always be doing, right? In one way or another. So there's just sort of global moral salience. When you put the toothpaste on your toothbrush in the morning, right, to brush your teeth, you're not probably thinking, this is an important moral decision. Well, you're not, right? I could give other examples, right, that are, just don't think that. But if you're a utilitarian, you should. Why? Well, because there might be better things you could do to improve the overall utility than brushing your damn teeth, right? And Kant will raise similar questions. Should you be looking at the maxim, let everyone brush their teeth in the morning with this kind of toothpaste, right? And only if I can universalize it should I be doing it. We might think, why bother with that at all? It's just not morally salient. And then someone says, excuse me, do you know where that toothpaste comes from? You know who makes that toothpaste? That comes from a third world country where they pay minimum wage, less than minimum wage. It's terrible conditions. You're making a moral choice when you use, right? See, it's not so innocent. But notice that what happens then is not just that everything is morally salient, it's that we can discover new saliences. Not that they're already all there, and we're just not aware of them. The point is, we can discover that some things that we thought were neutral are not neutral, and now we should pay attention to them. So let me give an example of how something would become morally salient in the room. Suppose one of us starts doing this, right? Falls on the floor. It's not like this. We all think, oh, would he stop doing that, right? It's distracting, get him out of here, right? No, we would think, this requires us to do something to help. Maybe we should be giving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation or calling 911 or, right? So sometimes things just pop into salience, and they would have them for all of us. But it might be something else. What's suddenly attracted your attention? What's made you shift your attention from the lecture is actually that you can feel that the person next to you is miserable. Maybe you can just sort of see or feel that they're sobbing a little, or there's something. And we can do it. We're very good at picking up on small clues, most of us, that other people are uncomfortable. I'm sure you've been in a restaurant where the couple at the next table are fighting. Low voices, but you can feel the anger. And it makes it very difficult to eat your dinner with pleasure, right? So suddenly you become aware that somebody has some needs. and you've been sort of kind to them. And maybe if you're a good agent, you act to try to do something to help. No, if you're a good agent, you're perceptive. You find many points of salience, right, that are available that other agents don't pay attention to, but that you pick up on. So what would a good moral agent be? Well, a good moral agent would be someone who had good salience responses, right? Who made salient the right things. When they come into the scene, the right things pop out as of moral significance. And one of the problems we're going to see with Kant is that Kant doesn't have a theory directly of moral salience, right? And so he sort of supposes that we already come to a morally constructed scene, and the question is, what should we do in it? But actually the primary question is, what's the salient? What are the saliences? Because without those, we don't have the scene constructed in a way that tells us that there's something for us to be making a decision on. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it makes sense at this point, but I wanted to go back to the question of mental energy, like how having a lot of saliences could waste your mental energy, because I don't see it would be as large amount of energy as people assume, because when we're defining salience, we're saying it's a presupposed inclination that is built in me.
Yeah, the energy was the way. Yeah, that's a good question. You're right. It was a way of speaking about it. The thought was not just about the energy you use up, though that can be considerable, much more than you think. So a very anxious person uses up an immense amount of mental space with their anxiety. But that's not the issue. The issue is, think about it eudaimonistically, right? You're wasting your eudaimonic time if you're paying attention to things that have no bearing on your happiness, when there are things that do have bearing on your happiness that you should be paying attention to. So you don't have to do it in terms of an economy of energy. You can just do it in terms of the relative importance of what you pay attention to. Yeah. So you could do it that way instead. Okay, now look, that's the first thing that Aristotle, it seems to me, is really good at. Both Plato and Aristotle have an ethics of vision. That is, they're interested in the construction of the scene and the points of salience. Right? They think that before you can even start to deliberate and act, you have to have constructed the scene about which you're going to deliberate and in which you're going to act. But if you don't do that right first, you'll be deliberating about the wrong thing. So consider the following, right? So there's somebody who's clearly in need of medical attention, right? So one of us passes out or falls on the floor, gasping for breath. We're all pretty decent people. We'd all immediately focus on that person. Right? But now imagine somebody whose points of salience are just massively skewed, right? So there's the person gasping on the floor, and they're thinking that's a goddamn tarantula. What if it starts to move towards me? What would I do if it moved? Shall I try to kill it? All right. There's something really wrong, isn't there? I'm deliberating about the wrong thing, right? Maybe I'm deliberating correctly. Maybe it is a tarantula, right? Maybe I will have to take avoidance reactions. But at the moment, it could just be asleep up there. It's not threatening, right? I'm busy calculating and deliberating about how to act in a scene that requires me to be thinking about something else altogether. I'm not a good moral agent because I do all that right. I'm a bad moral agent if I'm not deliberating about the right thing in the scene.
But wouldn't your calculating and deliberating about the, sorry, what were you saying, the word I don't remember.
Yeah. The tarantula.
The tarantula, be after the fact that you kind of, my point is, you first are, your attention's drawn to the tarantula by a very, in that state, you are at a subdoxastic mental state.
Yeah.
So, but when you're calculating, deliberating, it's a doxastic mental
Yeah.
state. You actually
Yeah.
believe that it could be.
Yeah, but
And
it's the
that's-
subdoxastic one that makes me do my calculating about that. So the point is that you can be an immoral agent because you're, as you call them, you're below belief, the reactive attitudes are wrong. And what does it mean that they're wrong? It means that in a scene in which the most morally important thing to be paying attention to is X, you're paying attention to Y. Even if, suppose you take X out of the scene, everything you do with respect to Y may be correct. But because X is in the scene, you're actually thinking about the wrong thing. So this is a real, we have to think, if we think about it economically, which is the way of life, it's a very handy way to think of it, right? Is we're spending a lot of our moral resources. We're spending them correctly in the sense that, right, we're not making mistakes over here. It's just that we're spending our moral resources on the wrong thing in the scene. And that's a huge moral problem, which is that so let me give an obvious example. So the issue is equal pay for women. Now, equal pay has a huge beneficiary. So if you're thinking eudaimonistically, you ought to be thinking that you would like equal pay for equal work, right? Okay, so what happened when we tried to pass an equal rights amendment, equal pay for women? Well, there were a huge lot of distractors that were put on the scene. Here's my favorite one. Well, if there's going to be equal rights for women, including equal, pay rights, then there can't be two different bathrooms for men and women. And so women will have to get used to seeing, this was the slogan, hairy men urinating. And that had a huge shock value. This is like the tarantula, right? Oh my God, I'd have to see a hairy man urinating? Oh no, I don't want equal pay. You know what? Yeah, I'd watch a lot of hairy men urinating if they doubled my salary. I mean, come on, how bad can it be, right? That's the thought, right? But notice the effect. It's a salience question. It's not that you're not going to deliberate correctly about this. You may think, no, I really don't want that. It's that you're being distracted from something else that's far more important to your eudaimonic outcomes than that. For one thing, you can always just decide not to use that bathroom. I just have to close your eyes if you're so upset about it. Notice the same thing happens with things like, we've really got to keep transgendered people out of bathrooms. Why? Because look, they're bound to assault little children in there. Can we see the statistics on that? No, you're much more likely to be assaulted by a presently sitting member of Congress in your bathroom than you are by a transgendered person. We're not busy keeping members of Congress out of our bathrooms, though probably we should, right, by this argument, right? It's a distractor. So it's saying, pay attention to this. It's the three-card Monte problem in ethics. Three-card Monte, you've seen it on the street, right? And which one is the thing you're never going to win? You shouldn't play it. It's so subtle. Okay. Okay, same. There's moral three-card Monte, right? Which says, look, pay attention to this, pay attention to this, pay attention to this. What's really important? What's really important? It's over here. And let me take, it's really important, it's really important. I'm going to raise the taxes. I'm really important, it's really important, it's really important. While you're busy looking over here, I'm going to have a major negative impact on your eudaimonic things. This is about how good you are at your salience creation, not about how good you are at deliberating once you've settled on the salience. So one of Aristotle's major things is to see that the virtues are about your salience responses. They're about how you construct the scene in terms of salience. Yeah.
Is there a formula Aristotle thinks we should use every time in forming saliences?
No. Here's what you have to have. The doctrine of the mean gives you a schema for how to adjust all the little interior weighing scales. Right? It says, right, get your weighing scale for fears so that they tilt a lot for very dangerous things, but very little for very minor dangerous things. Don't be like the foolhardy person. Don't be like the, Now, what is it to do that? How do you bring it about? Well, as he says wisely, we have to hear that from the natural scientists, right? We don't know fully how to bring that about, but we know that by habituating and doing other things, we can do a pretty good job. It's like, how do you train somebody to reliably hit a middle C, right? Well, you can. And in the moral case, it's like that, only it's a little harder. Or we start by building small ones, and then we get better and better. That's the thought. Yeah.
So, Aristotle would say you know you're observing the correct points of salience if your soul is harmonious,
No.
and,
No, that'd be getting it the wrong way around.
okay.
The thought is, if your soul is harmonious and is built properly around, right, maximizing your happiness, if whether or not that's contemplation, whatever it is. So when the salient scene is this way, right, that when you pay a lot of attention to this, it's because this has a big impact on your happiness, positive or negative. When you pay a little bit of attention to that, your responses are graded relative to their impact on your happiness, and you're getting that impact right. So in the case of fears, right, you have a big salience for very dangerous things. In the case of food, right, you see the salient features as being not just how good it looks or what it tastes like, but what its impact is going to be on your health and welfare. And that's not that you're doing calculations, it's that those calculations have been pre-done to adjust your responses correctly. Again, I think the skilled person is like this, right? So when you become a skilled pianist, you're not thinking about how to move your fingers, right? All of that part where you have to think, that was the training. When you get it, right, you're able to do it without thinking. Same with every single skill we've got. You want not to have to think about it. You want to have pre-done the thinking and program the computer appropriately so that now it will do it. Yeah.
I was wondering if in his picture there are degrees of salience. So
Sure.
say if there's a food basket and
Yeah.
there's one food item, if I eat it, I'll like it generally the kind of food items
Yeah.
will like just be deadly, and there's another like food
Yeah.
item too is just gonna cause minor
Yeah.
stomach ache, but I don't want either.
Yeah.
So like
Well, it's not, you're right, there are plenty of degrees, right? And there's a lot of leg room. There's a lot of room for thinking. There are indifference points on salience. It really doesn't matter whether you pay attention to that or this, right? And it doesn't matter, the degrees of difference may be small enough that only a fetishist would really care about them, right? You just think, yeah, it's good enough, right? We're always satisficers on these things.